I am certain we will see calls for recounts and calls for review by judges of results and all of the things that, we saw a preview of in 2020. I think this time it may be even more intense. And all of that is going to just be sort of noise. It's going to all just be chaos creation to try to cast enough doubt for there to be potential kind of shenanigans.
Hello, and welcome to the PoliticsGirl podcast. I'm your host, Lee McGowan. Let's get into it. Well, the political news is changing every day, which is why I am really pleased to introduce you to today's guest, Joanna Lydgate, who is the president and CEO of the States United Democracy Center and States United Action, one of the country's foremost leaders in the pro-democracy, free and fair election space. The goal of States United is to out all election deniers in Congress and those running for office again this year to do everything they can to support our election infrastructure and our faith in the election apparatus. Joanna and her team do everything from providing pro bono legal counsel to research and polling to partnering with law enforcement to respond to the threats around our elections to tracking and analyzing anti-democracy trends. I'm having her on today so she can explain to us why it is essential to be watching and working for our faith in the system and protecting our vote, especially at this chaotic time, as well as the importance of paying attention to election deniers who are still out there. As a side note, Joanna also happens to be the partner of Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey, making her the first partner of Massachusetts. Love it. So without further ado, please welcome my guest, fierce defender of democracy and civil liberties, president and CEO of the States United Democracy Center and States United Action, Joanna Lydgate. Welcome, Joanna.
Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining me and thanks for doing all the work that you do. As you say at States United, the battle for democracy begins before a single ballot is cast and continues long after the polls close on Election Day. But the truth of the matter is the American election system is under attack. There are anti-democratic forces working very hard to limit our freedom to vote, to interfere with nonpartisan election administration officials and infrastructure, and to basically spread lies and chaos around voting and the institution of voting. So it seems like the goal of States United is clearly to fight back against that.
Absolutely. And, we focus on the states, as our name would indicate. We focus on the state officials who are on the front lines of that battle right now. These are the people who run and protect and defend our elections. And we watched them do that in 2020. They'll do it again this cycle. So governors, state attorneys general, and secretaries of state in particular.
Okay. So the main ideas of your organization seem to be that you want to protect the freedom to vote, which is essential to a democratic country, and the nonpartisan, as you're saying, election administrators who make this voting possible. And you've been incredibly clear that when people undermine democracy, they should be held accountable, which is very nice to hear because honestly, I think we look around sometimes and it feels so often like they're not. But you are out here prioritizing the safety of voters, the safety of election officials, and kind of trying to fight back against these lies and disinformation that our elections aren't safe, that they're not going well, that there was a steal that can so easily affect people's opinions of elections by trying to amplify the truth more often.
That's exactly right. So the state officials we work with, they've been doing this work for decades and doing it in a completely nonpartisan way. We watched a lot of Republican election officials stand up in 2020 and speak truth about the results, speak truth about the integrity of the process. And, I think, look, I'm a lawyer. I'll spend all day litigating and we will have to do that again this cycle for sure. But I think this year especially, this is going to be a battle that will be won or lost, not in court, but in the court of public opinion, and really helping voters understand first what's at stake in this election. You mentioned how everything we care about comes down to free and fair elections. That's the bedrock of our system. So whatever your top issue is, right? It might be reproductive freedom. It might be climate. It might be education. It doesn't matter. All of those things depend on a system where the people we elect will represent our views and where the winner wins and the loser loses and people concede, when the election is said and done. All of those things, those are all up for grabs this cycle. So it's about helping people understand the stakes and also as you said, helping people understand that we have a system that's tried and true. It works incredibly well. And all of these lies and conspiracy theories that are swirling about our elections are just that. They're just lies. And it's just meant to undermine people's faith, to try to erode the system. And, we could talk more about the whole plan that we feel the anti-democracy coalition has right now, which, is more sophisticated, honestly, this time than it was 4 years ago.
Yeah, no, they've gotten better at their bad behavior, honestly, without a doubt. They've learned they've learned where our holes are. They've learned where the flaws in the system are. I often say, like, we dodged a bullet the first time, but we won't dodge it again because they know this time where to aim. So I'd love to just talk a little bit so people understand how your work works. And tell me if I'm getting this correct. There are 4 tiers to what you're doing, which is legal, providing free legal counsel to kind of state and local officials. If people want to check out your website, you have all the cases that you're in dealing with complaints and handling an amicus brief. So you said you're a lawyer, but you're basically providing free legal counsel on behalf of the parties and the states to help with voter laws. Then you have a public safety element where you're partnering with prosecutors and police chiefs and sheriffs and other people in state and federal law enforcement to best respond to the threats around our election or the emerging threats that put our elections at risk. And that part seems a lot like you're training people to best monitor what's going on. And then you have this research and policy element, which is an entire team, it seems like, a policy team and a research team who are out there analyzing trends related to elections, to disinformation, to anti-democratic efforts across the country. And that is so you know how to best handle what's coming at you. And then finally, you have a communications team, right? So talking to people in the states about these unprecedented levels of disinformation that we are constantly getting, that the elections aren't safe, or you shouldn't go to this polling place, or this is the wrong polling place, or that kind of thing. Institutions that we once trusted, we can trust again. And it seems like States United is serving as a kind of a hub for nonpartisan election information and facts. It's a place that anyone, no matter their political persuasion, can go to make sure they're getting the correct information about election security. Did I get that right as a general picture?
Listen, you're hired. It was great. That was an excellent overview. I'll maybe if I can kind of zoom out one layer more and just start with some of the fundamentals of how the system works, because that informs how we do our work. And I think in this country, we've just not done a very good job of civics education, of helping people understand, how democracy actually operates, and who does what, right? So there's a real desire right now among voters. Part of what we do is try to educate people about this system, like literally what happens after your ballot gets cast and how does it get counted and what are all the safeguards in place. But big picture, in each state, and states are on the front lines of everything we care about right now, right? Lots of gridlock in Washington. We're seeing so many of our rights and freedoms be held in the hands of our statewide officials, especially when it comes to elections. So governors set election-related policy. They make decisions about funding. They certify election results. Secretaries of state, and as we all saw, I think we became much more familiar with what a Secretary of State does in 2020. Maybe some of us had kind of no idea, but they run every aspect of election administration, working with county and local officials in their states. And then state attorneys general, really importantly, are there to defend strong election laws and defend election results. So our organization exists to provide a wraparound set of services, all the things you just described, Lee, to those statewide officials to help them be able to do their jobs as well as possible. So we will give them help defending election results when they have to do that this year, going into court when, we see the campaign challenge results across the country, as we saw 4 years ago. They will work to tell the story of how elections work, and we'll help them on that front as well. Really, our work, it comes down to a set of principles. First, you have to defend the system. That's our election protection work. You have to make sure that, when it's called into question, when it's challenged in court, when you see misinformation swirling out there, that people are given truthful information. Second, you have to defend the people who run the system and the people who need to access it. And that's what we call our public safety project. So that's just as you described, working with law enforcement leaders to make sure that when people go to cast their vote, they're not intimidated. When there are militia members who try to station themselves at drop boxes, that they are quickly arrested. That election officials who've been under threat over the last 4 years are also protected. And we do some really important work with some fabulous law enforcement leaders across the country who are really committed to protecting and defending democracy. And then you have to make sure that voters have access to the truth. So in a world where people are getting so much of their news on social media, and where, we've seen a lot of disinformation swirling about our system, we do work to make sure that people have facts about elections, that they have, as you say, places to go where they can get truly nonpartisan information. And then finally, when people step outside the bounds of democracy, you have to hold them accountable. So we have a project that is focused on accountability for people who've done things like file frivolous lawsuits, challenging election results, people who have tried to submit false slates of electors in 2020, people who have tried to storm the Capitol. We have a case against the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys. And I'm a former prosecutor, so that work is near and dear to my heart. I think it's really important that we send a message that, there's consequences when you violate the norms of our democracy.
Absolutely. So let me ask you then, as a nonpartisan organization with a mission about free and fair and secure elections, do you find it kind of difficult now when you see an entire political party, namely the Republican Party, gearing up to win elections, not so much based on how many people vote for them, but on major voter suppression efforts, on election vigilantism? You're talking about these people at the drop boxes with the guns. They're there for MAGA, right? Challenging ballots after the fact, what they are calling an army of poll watchers that they're creating, who will be partisan. And then, of course, a lot of this comes from the original election denialism from 2020. So what's your take on that, a nonpartisan organization at such a partisan time?
One of the best things about the work that I get to do, and it's really hard work, but one of the things that gets me out of bed every day is that a huge majority of Americans, it's always around 75% and above, will say that they want every vote counted more than they want their preferred candidate to win. That's been totally consistent over the last 4 years. People fundamentally believe in this idea of democracy. And that is true, across every party affiliation, across every ideology. We get to work with election officials in the states. Some of them are Republicans, some of them are Democrats, some of them are independents. And, we see every day how incredibly seriously they take their jobs. We saw in 2020 how they were willing to speak truth with consequences and against, threats and harassment. And so while it's definitely true that there's one party right now that's pushing this election denial ideology, I think it's also important for people to remember that it is still a faction. It is still a minority of people. And while they have overtaken a party for right now and a party platform, there's just a lot of really good folks across the country, both American voters and also election officials, election administrators, who don't believe in any of that and who do believe in the integrity of our system. And that's sort of what keeps me fighting, keeps me feeling like, we have something that is not just so important to protect, so worth protecting, but that people want us to protect. And, I think watching what happened in the midterms, where election deniers who ran for office were defeated in every statewide race in the battleground states, like that is a real sign. It's a real testament to the fact that when people understand what's at stake, they will turn out for democracy. I work with a lot of good Republicans, and I founded this organization with a good Republican, with Christy Todd Whitman. There's a lot of people who are fighting hard to try to preserve this democracy of ours.
I'm glad to hear that, because I often feel like the idea of election workers being harassed, or volunteers being harassed, or voters being harassed, or constantly questioning people's voting, or closing voting machines or ballot machines, or making people wait in line for 6 or 7 hours. It all feels so strategic, right? That these are all tactics being used to make the system appear broken and also make people lose faith in the system. It seems like this goal of undermining our elections and our faith in these institutions is a real tactic and an incredibly well-funded one, because the anti-democratic forces have been playing a long game, that these people understand that they're not going to win based on ideas or candidates. So at this point, democracy is not working for them. So they're not going to really hold up the foundations of democracy because they don't really want to live in a democracy. So they continue to undermine democracy with the hope that people will also lose faith in it and it just dies. And I feel like sometimes it's not just one deliberate action like what happened on January 6th or, a self-coup that Trump tried to do, but it's kind of like a death by 1,000 cuts. You're talking about someone that's in charge of election security. We had Nevada Secretary of State Cisco Aguilera on the show, and we focused a lot on how much attention and effort a lot of people have made to attempt to shore up people's faith in our elections after the big lie, and how destructive all of that terrible misinformation around the ideas that our elections are not free and fair affected people's faith in the system. And I keep saying to people, even if you're a Republican and you think that voter suppression or intimidation or even gerrymandering is working for you, it's not, because when you empower leaders to ignore the will of the voters, at first it seems like you're just ignoring the will of the voters you don't like. It's giving you more power. But ultimately, you are a voter. And if you give these people who would marginalize voters' voices and votes enough power, eventually they're not going to need you either, right? And I think about how the RNC platform members, like literally days ago, rolled all these people. They came to talk about the RNC platform. The RNC flew them all in. And then they said, here's what it's going to be. And they had no amendments, no discussion. They weren't allowed to put their voices in. And as one RNC member said, they rolled us. And that's what you get in a dictatorship. No one cares what you think, even if you think you're on the winning team. When you start taking power away from others, eventually they come from your power too. So I keep trying to get people to understand that it serves no one to undermine the electorate or our elections, because ultimately we're the ones that we all use it.
Yeah. Well, and I think to what I said earlier about, the midterms and watching how voters actually vote when they understand what's happening, voters don't like it either. So it's definitely not a winning strategy in the long term. I think that the question is, how do we make sure to protect and preserve our democracy as we're watching this all play out? Last time around in 2020, I think what we watched was sort of like an ad hoc campaign to try to overturn results state by state. It wasn't very well planned out. It did not work. It was like, okay, let's go challenge results in court, and then let's go try to, persuade elected officials.
Let's get this group of fake electors to try and sneak in the back door.
Let's try to storm the Capitol.
Great. Yeah, no, it was not great. It was like a Keystone Cop episode.
Yeah, and then I think what's happened since then is sort of an insurrection that hasn't been televised. It's been, just as you said, a very slow, deliberate process, a kind of a death by 1,000 cuts approach. But again, it's very strategic. And we summarize it as basically having three parts. It's try to change the rules, which is how elections are run. Try to change the refs, which is the people who actually run elections, so running election deniers for office, in order to change the results. Right? This is about trying to rig the system, trying to set yourself up to have control, and ultimately moving us closer to autocracy in this country. It is not what people want, but that's where this challenge of being able to tell the story. And I think a place where, as we're dealing with a lot of chaos and a lot of unknown right now in this moment and in this country, another thing that really centers me, sort of like I think about like when you're like, spinning around and you try to focus on like one point, one focal point, is these states and these statewide races. We have a number of them happening this cycle. And, state legislative seats are super important for people to really pay attention to what's happening in these key positions when there's other things out there that we can't necessarily control. That's a place where we focus as an organization, but I think a lot of listeners should be thinking about that too. And we track races through our organization at a website called electiondeniers.org. It lists out everywhere where there's important races that will impact elections and which candidates have said what, so people can really get educated and understand that, this is a game that is really being played out at the state and local level. And we all have to tune in.
If I asked you how many subscriptions you have right now, would you be able to tell me? How about how much they cost? Most people think they could, and most people are wrong, which is why it feels like money just flies out of our account and we have no idea where it's going. Well, it's probably going to subscriptions. Think about it. Between streaming services, fitness apps, delivery service, parenting apps, it's kind of endless. I'm guilty of this. I often sign up for things and then I forget I did it, and then I keep paying without ever using the app or the service, which is why Rocket Money is so great. Rocket Money helps you find out exactly what subscriptions you're actually spending money on and cancel the ones you don't want anymore. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills. You can see all your subscriptions in one place, and if there's something you don't want, you can cancel it with a tap. You don't even have to talk to customer service. Rocket Money will even try to get a refund for the last couple of months of wasted money and negotiate to lower your bills by up to 20%. All you have to do is take a picture of your bill, and Rocket Money does the rest. It's a terrific service, which is probably why Rocket Money has over 5 million users, saving a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions and saving its members an average of $720 a year. So stop wasting your money on things you don't use and cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/politicsgirl. That's rocketmoney.com/politicsgirl. ROCKET money.com/politicsgirl. Today's podcast is brought to you by Smalls. So my husband has been doing a lot of feeding of the 2 cats that live across the street. The owner is one of his best friends, and he's a single dad, and he's been away a lot recently on business. So Sean has been feeding these cats, and he noticed they weren't really loving their food. And quite frankly, he couldn't blame them because their food reeks. Anyway, he brought over a whole bunch of Smalls. Smalls was started in 2017 by a couple of guys who were home cooking cat food in small batches for their friends. Just a few short years later, they have served millions of meals to cats across the US. Smalls cat food is a protein-packed recipe made with preservative-free ingredients that you find in your fridge. And like my friends at Sundays for Dogs, it's delivered right to your door. That's why veterinarians.org rates Smalls at 10 out of 10 for ingredient quality. Sean says he can't believe how much better it smells, that stinky old cat food smell is gone, and the cats seem really into it. While other cat foods fill their foods with mysterious meat and byproducts and artificial flavorings and preservatives that no one can even pronounce, Smalls is doing it differently. Cats might be domesticated now, but they still need fresh protein-packed meals to be their best selves. Which is probably why, after making the switch to Smalls, 88% of cat owners reported overall health improvements, and the team at Smalls is so confident your cat is going to love their product that you can try it risk-free, with the Smalls team giving you a full refund if your cat is just not into their food. So now is the time to switch to Smalls. Head to smalls.com/politicsgirl and use the promo code politicsgirl to check out for 50% off your first order plus free shipping. That is the best offer you're going to find, but you do have to use the code politicsgirl for 50% off the first order. For the last time, the promo code is politicsgirl for 50% off your first order of Smalls plus free shipping. I think your cat will love it. This podcast is sponsored by Marley Spoon, the best food delivery program out there. You guys, Marley Spoon is so good. Our family has been doing it for months now, and every week we're like, are you kidding me? This is delicious. The veggies are fresh, they're not wrapped in plastic, the recipes aren't hard, they don't take hours to chop. Sometimes you even get your meat pre-breaded or marinated. It's just consistently excellent. We switched our meals from 4 people to 2 people while our son was away at camp. Easy peasy. We put it on hold when we go to pick him up in Canada and then go look at colleges. Super simple. Last night, my husband and I had sweet and sour spicy meatballs with coconut rice lettuce wraps, and it was delicious. Marley Spoon makes it so easy, and the quality of their food is second to none. Every week, there are over 100 different and delicious recipes to choose from, and it's completely customizable. Our family eats everything, but if you are looking for vegetarian meals, family-friendly dishes, dishes for bigger families, low-carb options, Marley Spoon has choices for you. You can even order things like a roast or spare rib dinner with all the fixings for a big crowd. It's amazing. I often add things from their pantry, like the ingredients to make a cake from scratch or ordering desserts to go with your meal. I keep ordering the individual pizzas for our freezer because they come from the fancy pizza place that we all love in LA. That's what Marley Spoon is giving you. It's not a typical meal kit. So experience the most personalized meal kit today with Marley Spoon. Head to marleyspoon.com/offer/politicsgirl and use the code politicsgirl for up to 25 free meals. That's right, up to 25 free meals with Marley Spoon. One last time, that's MARLEY spoon.com/offer/politicsgirl for up to 25 free meals, and make sure you use my promo code politicsgirl so they know that we sent you. Marley Spoon. I completely understand why Martha Stewart gave it her stamp of approval, because it totally has our family's stamp too.
The Politics Girl podcast has a new sponsor, 3 Day Blinds, and I'm totally psyched because I can't tell you how many rooms in my house need new blinds. 3 Day Blinds are the leading manufacturer of custom window treatments in the US. They have local, professionally trained design consultants who have an average of over 10 years experience to provide expert guidance on the right blinds for you in the comfort of your own home. You just set up an appointment and you'll get a free, no obligation quote the same day. And the experts at 3 Day Blinds handle everything. They design, measure, and install your new blinds so you can just sit back and let the pros do the work. No drilling into your wall a million times and finding out what you bought is too long or too short or too janky. Go check out their Instagram. You'll see right away how nice their stuff is. And 3 Day Blinds has been putting out a consistently high quality product for 45 years, which is probably why they're the highest rated blinds company on Trustpilot. No matter your unique needs, from motorization to home automation to room darkening or child safety blinds, 3 Day Blinds has thousands of options to fit any budget or style, with actual samples, so you won't have to guess what your blinds will look like, which, let's be honest, a lot of us did for years if we look around at our window treatments. Right now, you can get 3 Day Blinds, buy one, get one 50% off on custom blinds, shades, shutters, and drapery. For a free, no-charge, no-obligation consultation, just head to 3dayblinds.com/politicsgirl. That's buy one, get one 50% off when you head to 3dayblinds.com/politicsgirl. One last time, that's the number 3, DAY, blinds.com/politicsgirl.
This is a game that is really being played out at the state and local level, and we all have to tune in.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about electiondeniers.org because it's a really great site. I guess the mission would be to keep people who are election deniers visible, that you're tracking election deniers who have advanced through their congressional primaries and will end up on the ballot in November, because a vast amount of these election deniers who moved past their primaries this year were incumbents. They're already sitting representatives because, of course, most of these people won their previous election on the same ballot they claimed was fraudulent in 2020 against Donald Trump. So the Donald Trump part of the ballot was fraudulent. Their part of the ballot was fine, which of course has no logic. So I think it's important that we talk about what it does there, because you're rightly trying to remind people that Congress we elect in November will be the Congress that certifies the results of the 2024 presidential election. So what happened on January 6, 2021 will be happening again on January 6th, 2025. And a president can win the Electoral College, but not actually be declared president until the certification of the electoral votes in Congress. And if Congress refuses to certify the votes, then we have a real problem. So you've created electiondeniers.org so people can know who's in there and who might be denying elections when we come to that very important day in 2025.
That's exactly right. And we actually track it at a few different levels. So we look first at the statewide races, so races for governor, secretary of state, state attorney general, for all the reasons I've laid out about how important those positions are when it comes to elections, but also so many other things that we care about. And then we also are tracking the races for Congress for the reason you just laid out, which is that those are the people who will, be overseeing, participating in the Electoral College process. And right now we have about a third of Congress are election deniers. We have a lot of additional people on the ballot right now who've made it through primaries who are election deniers. We also have some key statewide races. I would, look no further than North Carolina, where there's a really important gubernatorial race right now. So, and a race for state attorney general. So what we've done is we've kept the receipts, Lee. We actually have gone and looked at all the things these people have said and represented going back, to 2020. And sometimes you'll see kind of like a disavowal of election denialism. Like you saw that from Trump recently, where he's kind of like stepping away from that platform a little bit because now he's realized like, oh, it might not be a winning strategy. Like, didn't do so well for us in the midterm. So like,
yeah, it's the same thing they're doing with Project 2025 and with
exactly,
abortion.
exactly.
Like, oh, we didn't really mean backpedal,
Totally.
backpedal. They definitely mean it.
Yeah, and the Project 2025 thing is, it is, my friend Olivia Troy called it ludicrous. She worked for Mike Pence, and she's absolutely right. Like, it's ludicrous to say that that's not your project. Like, those are all your advisors who created that document. So this is why I think it's so important that we have the research team that we do that can really go back and document these positions, because when people tell you who they are, you have to believe them. And just because now it's not politically convenient maybe to be, using the same language doesn't mean that that's not what these people believe and what they will do when they get elected to office. So we really encourage everyone to get smart, get educated about these races, spread the word, and really pay attention. The presidential, super important, but the races for statewide office and for Congress are obviously going to be absolutely critical as well.
I'm going to quote some of your own work back to you because I think that the audience should know what we're talking about. Who we elect to Congress is going to be so essential. An article on the States United Project site that you have points out that on January 6th, 2021, which is the day we had the insurrection, more than 120 members of Congress voted against the will of the people. And many of those people and others who share incredibly dangerous views about our elections are running for these positions of power again and will have the ability to vote again this year. So the website that you have created is a tool to illustrate we deserve leaders from both sides of the aisle who respect the will of the people, who will not deny election results. And that includes leaders in Congress. So now the last statistics I saw have at least 70 election deniers from 13 states moving on to the November general election. Each state that had a congressional primary had at least one election denier who advanced to the general election, which means that 1/5 of congressional candidates advancing to the November general election are election deniers. 67 are running for U.S. House of Representatives. 50 of them are incumbents, and 3 of them are on the ballot for the U.S. Senate. We should point out that right now, as you said, nearly a third of Congress right now is an election denier. That's 170 people out of 535 seats denied the last election results. So those people represent 36 states, which is almost 3/4 of the country. And that includes 126 members who previously refused to certify the 2020 election results. So I'm not sure how many people understand that if neither president gets the majority of electoral votes in a presidential election, the House of Representatives actually gets to choose the president, and each state gets one vote. I don't think most people understand how that works, that everyone is basically completely disenfranchised at that point. So if you deny certain election results and you take, say, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Michigan out of the mix, and suddenly neither candidate has a majority, our Constitution says you kick the whole thing to the House. So it doesn't matter that the Democrats in the House represent tens of millions more Americans than the Republicans. The Republicans simply have more states, period. Less people, more states. And each state gets one vote. So California, with its 40 million people, will get the same one vote for president as North Dakota, which it's with its 780,000 people. It's not remotely democratic. It's not how our elections are supposed to be decided, but it would certainly serve a bunch of people who want permanent minority rule and who are no longer that interested in democracy or the fairness of the system. So there are lots of things at play that we need to understand how important it is not just to elect a president who believes in democracy and the rule of law and the president isn't above the law, but we elect congressional members who believe the same thing and will vote to certify an election and not throw the whole thing to the House.
Yeah, again, to our conversation about civics education, like it would be really great. Dream would be that,
If
our
people
kids,
understood that.
our kids grow up understanding all of this. My poor kids probably will because of, what they're subjected to. But I think that
Same.
there is some of this that is dealt with through a law that was passed in the wake of 2020, the ECRA, the Electoral Count Reform Act. So there are some safeguards in place. We have a system of checks and balances in our country. We have the courts. It's not going to be a total free for all, but I think it is really, really important for people to understand that what you're describing is, absolutely a possibility. And so looking at what these potential members of Congress have said, what positions they've taken, getting them on the record about their position on, certification, on the integrity of our elections. That's why, as I said, we track all this on our website. And then in the statewide races, like, let's not forget those either. I think there's 20 election deniers right now at play in the statewide races. There's not as many of those this cycle, but there are some really important ones. So this is all, part of our work and getting the word out to voters, educating the media, helping people understand this aspect of the process. It's a little bit kind of weedy, right? It's a little bit technical, but it's like everything else we care about is at stake. So
Yeah.
it's a good place to focus right now at a time of, some uncertainty.
And let me ask you, the common response to people who are election deniers, who are asked if they will support the results of the next election, is if it's fair. What is your response to that? Because that seems to be the common line I'm hearing over and over again.
Yeah, it's fair. The system is fair. The system is free. The system is safe. The system has operated, really well for many, many years. And as you said, we have election officials who certified results for their party, certified results not for their party. We've got elections where Republicans have won in some races and not in others. It's like we've got a system that works, folks. So I think that the pushback to that kind of statement has to be, well, the system is fair. So will you accept the results? There's going to be a lot of questioning of different aspects of the process this cycle. I'm certain that we will see that play out. I am certain we will see calls for recounts and, calls for review by judges of results and all of the things that, we saw a preview of in 2020. I think this time it may be even more intense. And all of that is going to just be sort of noise. It's going to all just be chaos creation to try to cast enough doubt for there to be potential kind of shenanigans. So really just trying to educate people right now about how trustworthy this system is. And again, I think people step up and believe that and defend it when they have the opportunity.
Yeah. We had Mark Elias of Democracy Docket on the show, who's with the Elias Law Group, and he's done a lot of work fighting back against this kind of stuff and election denialism. And he was talking about this year's season in election vigilantism, that if 2020 was about undermining mail-in ballots and 2022 was about messing around with who was allowed to vote, he was concerned that 2024 was going to be about messing around with the votes themselves and the election infrastructure itself. This idea of, harassing election workers and volunteers and questioning voters and questioning ballot machines and having groups of people kind of performatively act hyper vigilant about fraud and filing, mass voter charges, this kind of thing. And that kind of brings me back to law enforcement's role in this. Our elections are clearly a very big job for law enforcement. During our elections, they have to maintain public safety in our communities. They have to make sure that our polling places and election facilities are safe and welcoming to voters. But with this kind of spike in election-related threats, in intimidation, in harassment across the country, I'm sure it's only become more challenging for law enforcement, but I know that you are making a plan to help them to do their work. Will you tell me just a little bit about that? Because I really do think people get worried when you talk about partnering with law enforcement, when the general consensus is that law enforcement are typically pro-Trump, pro-Republican people, stop the steal, thin blue line stuff. Do you find that, or do you find that most of law enforcement are open to these ideas to protect our votes and for people to have faith in the system?
We definitely find that almost across the board, the law enforcement leaders we work with in the key states very much view this as part of their job. Now, it was not something that law enforcement had to spend a lot of time on in the past. It was not the case that
Yeah.
you'd
When
have
we
to
weren't
show up.
showing up.
Yeah, you wouldn't have to be worried about, protesters showing up on the front lawn of your Secretary of State or your local election official. You wouldn't have to worry about militia members stationing themselves at drop boxes or polling places. But that is part of the job now. And, what we find is that it's just a question of education and resources. So our work is really going into these key counties, cities in the most critical states, helping law enforcement leaders train their teams on, what they need to know, how they need to prepare. There's a great, conversation I had with the chief of police in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And he's like, we're used to protecting people during big events. Like we do football games all the time, but elections weren't typically one of them, but now they are. And so, he's gotten his team totally up to speed. He's connected with his local election official. They're prepared. They do all the sort of scenario planning. And I guarantee you, he'll do a beautiful job protecting that election. I have no idea what his political affiliation is. It doesn't matter. That's what we find really across the board. It's a fine line for law enforcement to walk because at the same time as, you do need to respond to legitimate threats, you don't want people to feel like polling places are places where there's going to be a big law enforcement presence. You don't want people to be intimidated from voting because of that. So it's really about trying to make sure that, the planning is there and that in scenarios where they need to respond, they're prepared to respond and respond quickly. Again, to my point about accountability, right? Like you don't just get to go and show up on the front lawn of your local election official without consequences. There's going to be consequences, but it's another part of our work, honestly, Lee, that gives me a lot of hope because I think that there's just a huge commitment out there to making sure that the system is free and fair and that the person with the most votes is the person who wins.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear that. Truly, I am, honestly. Finally, before you go, in June, you put out a best practices resource about artificial intelligence in our elections and suggestions you had for election officials to use this tool properly. Could you explain that to us a little bit? Because I think the idea is AI is going to be posing a challenge for election officials because they can generate such realistic videos and audio and images and deep fakes that are going to be used to deceive voters and election officials. And AI just makes it easier for bad actors to spread disinformation or attempt some sort of phishing organizations or even to carry out cyber attacks. So will you talk to me a little bit about the AI element of it? Because I think that's the future we're walking into.
Absolutely. And AI is going to be a force for, the proliferation of disinformation, unfortunately.
Yeah.
AI can also be a force for good when it comes to election officials being able to, get information, truthful information out to voters. So AI is here. It's not going anywhere. I think we have to figure out both the ways that election officials can help harness it for good. So one of the kinds of things we work on is helping them. They put out a lot of content, right? They put out information, videos, et cetera, helping them do watermarks on their content so people can know what's real, actual, official information that is coming out from a trusted source. It's definitely going to be part of the future of our elections. I think we've seen, though, that, it's part of the service we provide to state officials. I think we've seen that there's been quick action in places where AI has been used for bad, like the robocalls that we saw happen earlier this year in New Hampshire. And so what we're focused on is helping them deal with issues where they arise, be prepared for what's ahead, do the best that they can in terms of working with the platforms when there's content that needs to be taken down. And I feel confident that this cycle, there's going to be a really well-protected election that, my hope is that AI won't be as much of an issue as maybe some of the, kind of worst case scenarios that we've heard and read about would have us believe.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for people who run our elections to increase their cybersecurity for, obvious reasons. I think probably the idea that they should be preparing for, larger than normal volumes of AI requests. I know that a bunch of conspiracy theorists have already been bombarding election officials with records requests, and it takes them forever to give it to them. And then essentially that's less time for them to do their administrative duties. I think what you're talking about watermarking things, which is so people understand it's a way of authenticating a video that says this is an official material from the Secretary of State or from your AG or that kind of thing. It's a digital signature. So you can establish and authenticate what is real and what is not real. I think there are a lot of things that we can use to address the harmful uses of AI. And then ultimately, we just want to warn the public that they may come across AI disinformation, like all those pictures of Donald Trump with his black friends, right? Those are all AI generated. Like that is insane, right? Like he's at a cookout. Those are not real pictures. And the public needs to be aware and know what to look for and double check their sources of things so they know how many scams are out there, who's a trusted source, where they're getting proper information. And so they can really help weed the truth from the lies.
It's so important. I'm so glad you made that point, Lee, because I think it has to be part of our education right now, especially for our kids, that you have to be much more careful than we might have had to be 10 years ago about where we're getting information, what's true, what's not true. It's part of why we work really hard as an organization to make sure there are places where voters can go, where it is truly nonpartisan, factual information about elections. Do not get your news about elections or where to vote or how to vote from, social media or from other sources that are not, trusted sources like your Secretary of State. And so, it's just going to be it is not going to be part of our future. It's part of our present that people need to be really carefully fact checking, and with anything they look at, same thing. That's part of why having things like digital signatures, so people know what's real and what's not, is going to have to be part of the system now.
Yeah, double tap on your information for sure.
Double tap, that's right.
I want to thank you so much for joining us today, Joanna, and thank you for focusing your clearly many talents on protecting our democracy. We obviously need groups like you. There are patriotic Americans all over this country who are fighting for what's best for the nation and not just what's best for ourselves. So please tell people how they can follow your work and help from our end. How can we help you?
First of all, what you do is so critical. The work you do to help people understand what's at stake right now, to educate people. Listening to the podcast is a good place to begin. I'm definitely a fan, so I'll say that. Our website is statesuniteddemocracy.org. The website where we track election deniers is electiondeniers.org. And our social handle is @StatesUnited. So follow us. We have a great newsletter that we put out every week that gives updates on what's happening in the states and, what people need to be paying attention to. I also just like to remind everyone that there are so many ways to get involved right now at the state and local level, whether that is, working, finding a race that you care about and helping and volunteering and working on it, whether it's, volunteering to be a poll worker. That's really important, especially with the effort on the anti-democracy side to be recruiting people. If you're a lawyer thinking about helping out with election protection work, and absolutely, I think all of us in our lives every day have opportunities to be spreading the word about how much this election matters, not just for all the reasons that we kind of constantly hear about, but really in terms of this democracy of ours. And democracy is like a hard word that not everybody necessarily relates to, right? But I like to talk about it in terms of our values as a country, our freedoms, and the ability to have free and fair elections moving forward. All of that is at stake this year, and not just in the presidential race. It's at stake in so many other races for Congress, for statewide officials, for state legislatures. So, get involved, pay attention, spread the word, and listen to the podcast.
Yeah, get involved, pay attention, and spread the word. Honestly, everything depends on our free and fair elections. So people need to keep that in mind and do everything they can to support the system, because it's the system that will end up holding up our values and our voice. Thank you so much for joining us today, Joanna.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
So that was Joanna Lydgate, reminding us that we have to defend the system and the people who run the system and the people who need access to the system. That voters deserve the truth. And when people step outside the bounds of democracy, they need to be held accountable. We need to remember that we aren't as divided as we're led to believe. That 75% of this country would say that it's more important to them that every vote is counted than their party wins. I want to thank Joanna for joining us today and for starting such a fantastic organization, and you for caring enough about democracy to be here. Now go and check out statesuniteddemocracy.org or electiondeniers.org to see what you can do to help shore up our system. Until next week, PG out.
The Politics Girl podcast is written and performed by me, Lee McGowan, in partnership with the Meidas Media Network, and produced and edited by Happy Warrior Entertainment. All rights reserved.